Ahoy! Yesterday I talked about Amazon's announcement for their new game, the Lord of the Rings MMO. Since then they have made more posts about it and given us a lot more information about how things will work, and this is very, very good for New World, so I want to talk about it. The first thing that they talk about in their new announcement is that they have a lot of fans of Lord of the Rings on the team that is working on this game. They say the number one thing about a property like this is that you have to be respectful and authentic. When somebody is a fan of the Lord of the Rings and sits down and plays this game for the first time, they have to say, this was crafted by a bunch of people who lived in this world just like I do in my head. They get it. And I mentioned this yesterday, but I want to emphasize again that this is not connected to the Amazon show that is relatively new, the Rings of Power. It is just based on the old movies/books, being The Hobbit as well as Lord of the Rings as a whole. But here's where things get really interesting. The Lord of the Rings MMO will be using Azoth Engine. Azoth Engine is the modified lumberyard engine that is also being used for New World. At this point you may rightfully say, well, that's maybe not a good idea because the Azoth Engine is quite shaky. But they are saying the Orange County studio plans to evolve that engine considerably to deliver something that feels distinct from New World and fitting for Middle-earth. The team has some big plans for the next generation of New World's Azoth Engine that will unlock exciting possibilities for its take on Middle-earth. So effectively, they are going to build heavily upon the Azoth engine and probably upgrade it a lot, which probably also means, because now they have the Lord of the Rings deal behind that, there's gonna be a lot of money going into the Azoth engine. And at this point, this obviously becomes a very mutual benefit. They want things to work well in New World and test them out in New World so that they can apply them in the next MMO and the Lord of the Rings MMO as well. That in itself is massive for the longevity of New World because it means that they have to keep running New World if they want to have this testing ground. So any theory of them letting New World die out slowly like people have been predicting for over a year now, not really happening because that would just be very impractical now if they want to get the Lord of the Rings MMO right. But there's of course the question what will happen after launch. Now they had some words on the whole situation between New World and Lord of the Rings in general as well. They say that while the Orange County Studios Lord of the Rings game will be a rather different experience than New World, it will build upon expertise and learnings from the previous game. They also say that the studio will continue to support New World as it begins to work on the new Lord of the Rings project. Again, this makes absolute sense if they're using the Azoth engine and test things in New World anyways. I quote, "Thankfully, its large team has developed a pragmatic and proven approach to building and sustaining an MMO and understands how to manage multiple projects in parallel, all while listening to player feedback." Now, this is obviously marketing fluff here, but realistically, they can throw money at this if they want to, and if they think New World is going to stay profitable even after the Lord of the Rings MMO, they will easily be able to have the people for that working on that, if they are interested. There may be a reason for them to be interested, because they say they do want to kind of leverage what they've learned in New World, but they're also determined to deliver a truly unique and differentiated experience in this upcoming Lord of the Rings game. Through the article, they in various times and in various different ways mention how they wanted to feel close to the stories, to the books, and that they wanted to feel very Lord of the Rings. They also say New World has substantial new features in development, and that basis plus new innovations will provide a compelling environment to create a virtual Middle-earth experience. One example they're mentioning is New World's experience with large-scale multiplayer combat, which they think will have clear application and relevance to Tolkien's Third Age, which also features various large-scale battles. One of the headlines in the article is also, "But don't expect New World 2.0. I wish they would have gone into a bit more detail as to what differentiates the two titles. They make some vague mentions, but not really anything more specific. I'd like to hear about what they are planning. Maybe, for example, I could imagine that in some ways the Lord of the Rings MMO may have a heavier emphasis on both story and PvE content, because that kind of ties together, but then maybe has very large-scale fights in between, whereas New World has a lot more of that casual PvP side going on. But I do think there is room for both. One thing they don't really mention that I think is very crucial here is if they are running two MMOs on the same engine, they can use one as a testing ground for the other. If it's executed successfully, I would expect the Lord of the Rings MMO to end up with a bigger player base than New World realistically, just because of the name that is behind it. And if that is the case, then New World could be a very interesting testing ground for features that they're planning to also move into Lord of the Rings later. This would also make sense from the perspective that New World players are fairly hardened when it comes to dealing with bugs and inconsistencies in the game, because if you're still here at this point, you've probably experienced quite a few of those over the years, unless you're a very recent addition. So it's not exactly an audience that would easily be scared away by some feature being a bit janky at the start and not functioning fully as expected, because that's still the case for quite a few features right now. Meanwhile, with a shiny new toy like a freshly released game, you need to be a lot more careful because you don't want to scare away your initial audience that may not be as resilient to bugs and so on as the New World audience is. To me, the perspective of being able to sit on the forefront of new features and see what they will be like and kind of follow along with their development is very cool. I know not everyone likes that, but I'm somebody who likes to go on the PTR and see how things are there. And obviously some things will be buggy, but I think it's always cool to see them first and find out how they work and try to toy around with them. So if that's the route that AGS plans to go with New World in the long run once the Lord of the Rings MMO is released, I'm not mad at all, but I expect that is a long time away anyways. They also talked about the previous attempt to release a Lord of the Rings MMO. They said that unfortunately the first deal fell through, but after the success of New World, Amazon Games and Middle-earth Enterprises discussed the idea of a new collaboration and agreed that the Orange County studio is the best fit to deliver an MMO experience based on Tolkien's novel, and they signed a new contract. And in the rest of the article, it sounds like some people at Amazon Games really wanted to make a Lord of the Rings MMO happen. Now, I'm not entirely surprised here. Obviously, this could all just be marketing talk, but considering there's a pretty big overlap of gamers and game developers and Lord of the Rings fans, they were probably actually that excited for it. Now, they mentioned the success of New World here, and obviously they like to refer back to the numbers that New World had at launch, which is a bit misleading to say the least. But I think this is still worth keeping in mind. We're seeing very good progression on the changes that New World is making at the moment and introducing a ton of features that we really wanted from the start, but now we are getting them. And I'm expecting that over the coming month we'll see even more of those. I just today talked about all the changes that will likely be coming to crafting and farming gear in PvP and in PvE, and those kind of things make me hopeful for New World, but they also really benefit the Lord of the Rings MMO. Take for example the PvE side. The Lord of the Rings MMO will be able to launch with a working group finding system, with a mutation system, and with whatever else New World has that you may be interested in expeditions. They also have the experience now when it comes to how loot functions, what people like, what they don't like, so we will likely see systems like that implemented from the start where you have good loot from dungeons, from specific bosses with specific difficulties, and you will likely have a guaranteed chance to get certain loot if you do a boss zone so many times, some fail-safe system in that regard. So all the kind of stuff that New World didn't have at the start that drove a lot of players away will definitely be in the Lord of the Rings MMO from the beginning. Because it is a Lord of the Rings MMO, which is one of the largest fantasy franchises, this will definitely see a large influx of players right at the start, because people are just gonna see what the Lord of the Rings MMO is like. And then it is about keeping those players, keeping them interested and keeping them engaged. And this time Amazon is equipped for that because they have the experience from New World now, they know how to do all these improvements, they're using the same engine, and by the time that MMO comes out, New World will probably have a ton of improvements on top of what it already has anyways, that can all be implemented in the new game as well. I will say that despite their article, I don't believe that there is no chance of this becoming New World 2.0 and people ditching New World and going to Lord of the Rings and the support on New World no longer being it worth it overall. But I think if that is the case, then the games would be similar enough that it wouldn't really be an issue for most New World players to switch from New World to Lord of the Rings either. If the games are too different and not interesting enough for New World players, they probably won't switch. Realistically, I think only a very small portion of New World's player base is here for the storyline. Sure, they exist, but I think most players are there for the PvP, especially for the mechanics, or just enjoy the PvE aspects of it. And I think those things, if they are the same way in Lord of the Rings, would still be there. It would just be with a different story coding. So for me, it's not a problem in either scenario, but I would be particularly happy if New World ends up being the testing ground for all the new stuff, because that would give me a reason to continue playing New World while also playing the Lord of the Rings MMO. Like I said in my last video about this, an ideal scenario for me would be a cycle where there's content released in New World and then there's content released in Lord of the Rings and then back and forth, so you always have something to do. And I also have something to do, which is talking about elemental aversion and shirking fortification tomorrow and how you want to gear in light. So if you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. Also, if you're interested in future updates about what's going on with the Lord of the Rings MMO especially. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.